Look at this card. You might be thinking they either used WebGL with Three.js to achieve this, or maybe it's a video overlay from After Effects, but nope. It is created entirely with Rive, which allows you to create really cool stuff like this within their web-based editor without touching code. Now, this example is from the Design Studio Pixel Point, and I thought I'd give it a stab at recreating this effect for this video tutorial. And while this is going to be a longer tutorial, those of you who take the time to watch the whole thing are going to gain a big advantage over other designers, because I think really in 2025, Rive is going to be an integral part of modern websites going forward. Alrighty, so the first thing you need to do is to create a free Rive account and then click New File, and you'll see something like this here in the center, the artboard. So width and height, something like this would actually probably work. I'm going to do a little bit larger, so like let's go 1,000 for the width and like 750 for the height. Create artboard. Okay, so here is our artboard, and the first thing I'll do is change the background color to something like blue, like a lighter blue or so, something like that. And then I will get the rectangle tool, hit R, or just click up over here, and just left click and drag out something like a card size right around there. Now, if you want to center it vertically and horizontally, these two options up here will do that. Okay, now for this color, we're going to go ahead and just grab this background color real quickly and then drag our color picker, somewhere like around here, kind of like a dark blue. And then additionally, we will give this a border corner radius right there. I'm going to put in like 10. All right, so now we have our rounded corners and we're all looking solid and ready to rock. So what I want to do now, though, is I want to recreate this real quickly in Photoshop so that I can create the assets that will be needed in order to create this interesting animation beneath it. So we understand that this is 1,000 by 750, so that's the first thing I'll tackle here in Photoshop. So we're going to do 1,000 width by 750, and then additionally, we'll give it the same background color as well. Typically, I'd be working on multiple monitors, so I don't have to keep on minimizing stuff, but I'm recording here, so it's a crappy workflow. So next up, we'll take this color code, and then I'm just going to paste that in, or, I could just use a rectangle right here, change the color here, hit OK. All right, and then finally we go back, and we're going to see what the size of our rectangle is, which happens to be 376 by 441. 376 by 441. See if I can forget that. All right, so we'll do another one. 376, 441. My brain is still working. Awesome. And also, if you really want to level up your UI UX game, definitely check out my interactive UI UX design course at DesignCourse.com. Okay, now we're also, one final task is to get our color code here so we're matched up. All right, and I'll double click on this. Okay, we'll also give ourselves a 10 for the border radius. All right, so now we will be essentially, yeah, right there is, no, that's not the center. Come on, Gary, where is the horizontal center? Yeah, it should be right around there. Okay, so now what we'll do is we're going to focus on creating a new layer that will be a mask. So Control-Shift-N as in new will give you a new layer, and we can click this option, use previous layer to create a clipping mask, and hit OK. And then that way, we can now come in and create the shape. There's going to be two different shapes, one that kind of moves back and forth down here, and then also one that rotates. So let's do the one that kind of just moves back and forth. And the way I'll do this, there's multiple ways to skin a cat here in Photoshop, is to take the pen tool and make sure it's in shape mode, not path. And the fill is going to be white. So we just grab this right here, make that white. And what I'll do is just kind of out here somewhere, I'm going to left click, create an anchor point there, hold shift so that it stays on the horizontal path, and left click and drag right around there. And then I'll do another one like right here. And then we'll come down and do another one like right here. Just like this. There we go. So now what we can do is we could approach this in a few different ways. If you want to do it the non-destructive approach, we go to Filter, Convert to Smart Filters right here, hit OK, and then we can go to Filter and Blur, and then Gaussian Blur. All right, so the blur amount is going to be up to you, and it will obviously have an impact some way, shape, or form. And now what we can do is we can grab our rectangular marquee tool, and if I real quickly release this clipping mask, right click, release clipping mask, we can kind of see the size of this thing. And so I'm just going to make a selection like right here, and then hit Control C to copy. Now hit Control N, hit enter, paste it in, Control V, and we can kind of see where it's at here. Now what we could do is save this. Now I just do Control Shift Alt S, or save for web, which is the old school way, which is fine. We could use PNG 24-bit transparency enabled, hit save. And then now I'm going to go back and create a new folder, final project, just to save this asset in. So we'll call this one bottom-blur. All right. The other thing while we're working here in Photoshop that I want to do is, and by the way, we can right click and create the clipping mask again, just to show you what it looks like here. If we do overlay, which is what we'll be doing, it kind of, sometimes it doesn't accurately translate to what it looks like in Rive itself, but it kind of just gives you an idea. I'll hide that, and we're going to create a, essentially an ellipse this time. And with the ellipse tool selected, I'm going to hold left click, hold it down, hold Shift and Alt, and that will scale it from the center. And we're going to use a size like right around here. You don't have to be exact, but roughly around here is what you want. And then what we're going to do is click on our pen tool over here, left click, and choose Add Anchor Point tool. We're going to add a few more anchor points right here, 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 and here. Then we take the direct selection tool, which is this one. And if you don't see them, you click on this element, and there's a bunch of tools down here, by the way. Just a quick tip. And then now we could take these and just play with them a little bit. Like maybe this one comes out a little bit further, maybe this one goes in. And you could, of course, play with these anchors and get it looking exactly how you wish. I'd say that's pretty good right there. And to show you the destructive approach of doing this, instead of creating a smart object or a smart filter rather, we can right click and just rasterize the layer and then go to Filter, Blur. There you go. So now Control A, Control C to copy. Control A selects all, by the way. And then Control N, hit enter, paste, get rid of that background layer. That way it makes it transparent. Save for web, which is Control Shift Alt S, and transparency, save it, and we'll just do this, we'll call this blob. All right, so that should be for the, for this particular effect at the bottom, that should be all we need. So now what we'll do is switch back to Rive, and we're gonna go to Assets, and we're gonna, under Images, click plus, we're gonna click Final Project, and we'll import both of those. And now it has added them. So let's do our bottom blur first. We're going to left click and drag this in and put it right at the bottom or so. And the first step is to click on clip. When you do that, you get this blue outline. You can just select the element in which you want it to be the clipping mask. So you click the rectangle one, there you go. So just like in Photoshop. So now we can put this down here and choose, the height, whatever we want based on or however we experiment with this. So what I'll do is move this over, probably like in the starting position. I don't want to go further than here because then you see the edge. So move this over, and we're going to change this to a overlay. So it does look exactly like it did in Photoshop when we chose overlay. Now another thing I want to do, which can really greatly affect the overall appearance here, is to create a ellipse. And to do that, you choose O for your keyboard, or come over here to get the ellipse tool. And I'm just going to Shift Alt and make it, let's see here. Yeah, we'll make it roughly like this size. I may end up changing that. And we want to do a clip again with the rectangle that's selected. And we're going to choose under fill a radial fill. Come here to the center. And for the color right here, we're going to choose that color. So it's kind of fading off to that color. And then here in the middle, really, what we could do is change this to overlay as well. You can kind of see once we do that, it does end up affecting what happens underneath it. The brighter it is, you can see it's starting to affect other areas. And for now, let's go ahead and just toggle this off. At least we've created it. And what I want to do is, for this particular element, I want to move it back and forth. All right. And so what we do is we switch to our Animate tab. And when we do that, we'll see this animation in confusing looking situation coming up down here. Don't worry about it. If you've never seen this before, we'll get it worked out. So what we want to do is create, or rather we could click on timeline 1. We could double click this and we'll just call this idle. This is where our main animation will occur. And so what we want to do is create a keyframe for this particular bottom blur layer that's selected. And we want to make a keyframe on the X position. So we just come over here, you click that little blue button, and now we have a keyframe right there. Now if we extend this down, we can see the actual property as well, the X axis. So I'm going to move over here right around near the center, and we're going to move it to the point that we want it to go, like right around here. And then what we'll do is take this keyframe, select it, we'll move over. With it selected, we copy and then Control V to paste. That will just take that keyframe and put it right here as a little bit of a pause. And then we'll take this keyframe, the first one, copy that, Control C, and go to the N and then Control V to paste back in. So now if we hit the space bar, we'll see what this looks like. Okay, not exactly the most exciting thing ever, but let's go ahead and change this to a loop. So now it's going to go forever, and it's way too fast. So over here, we change playback speed to like 0.15. Now you're going to see a much slower kind of nice animation. Okay, now another thing we could do if we wish to make things a little bit more smooth is to click on cubic for interpolation. And to do that, we could select all of our keyframes. And you'll see that when it comes to the beginning and the end, it will slow down. So it gives you kind of like a better animation. All right, so that is simple enough. Now what we could do again here, let's go back to the Design tab. We could take our bottom blur and we could duplicate that. Now notice how it has a compounding effect right there. Now if we go back to Animate, you'll see when we duplicated bottom blur, it didn't duplicate it down here. So if we take this bottom blur and hit Control D, oopsie. So if we take this bottom blur and select Control D, now you can see it is created an exact representation of it. But one of the things that we can do to make it different is we can go back to the Design tab and we can kind of squash it down just a bit. And so what I did is just grabbed this and just pulled it down. That's for this scale on the Y axis. And if we go back to Animate, hit the space bar, now it's a little bit different, but we can also adjust the speed at which it moves by moving these elements, for instance. So it's not going to move exactly in the same speed, so to speak, as the other one. And then we can also adjust, for instance, the position as well on this keyframe. Maybe it only goes here, and then we'll copy that. We'll go to this keyframe, we'll delete that, and then paste it back in. So now there's a little bit of a lag effect between the two. Maybe one more thing I'll do over here is to, I think that's good for now. So now what we'll do is we're going to go back to our assets and we're going to take our blob. Let's go back to the Design tab, drag this big old blob in here, clip, will be our rectangle again. All right. So now what we can do is I could change this here to overlay. Now you can see something that's, potentially cool beginning to happen. We're going to switch to animate. And so for the blob, what we can do is animate the rotation. So we're going to come over here at the very beginning with the blob selected, and we're going to choose rotation, put a keyframe right there at the beginning, go to the very end, and we'll change this value 360, or you could put negative 360 to make it go the other direction. So now it's not quite exactly how I want it to, because I wanted this part to be kind of white. So we could take our blob, and with overlay, we can experiment with the different blend modes, like hard light, for instance, might be cool. Now, if we bring back our ellipse, drag it up over here, and let us modify a couple things. Part of this process can involve just experimenting with the different blend modes by literally going through them. And this is what helps you kind of understand the different ways that it can essentially affect the overall appearance. This here is super cool. So let's make a couple adjustments. What we'll do is select the gradient, and instead of making the inner portion white, which right now looks blue because of the blend mode, we'll change it to a light blue color itself, and that reduces the intensity of that effect. And we could also take this, but change the opacity to 0. All right, so now it's not quite as intense as it once was. I think what I'll also do is kind of drag this down, like right around there. Okay, and then additionally, let's select our blob. Yeah, we're at hard light already. That looks pretty good. Let's go ahead and hit the space bar, and we'll see kind of what this ends up looking like. I think this is up too high. I don't want it to have this much of an effect. And then additionally, I made a big mistake. It's not a big mistake, but a small mistake. When I was adjusting the properties of this, I was in Animate tab, so it added keyframes for this ellipse, and I didn't want that. So what we can do is just delete the first keyframe there and delete this one. We'll see, did that put us back to the original? I think it did. Yeah, it did. No big deal. Let's go ahead and go back here, select that, and reduce that. There we go. And again, I could make this a little bit larger, make it fill out the whole thing. Okay. Oh, and by the way, the reason that didn't update is because if we go back to our gradient, it's only affecting to that point. So we could do this. Again, to lessen the intensity, you can play around with these values here. For now, I'll just leave it like this. And next up, I want to take the blob itself and kind of position it down. Okay, so let's go back to animate, and let's see what that looks like. I think it's a little bit too much saturation with the blob, so I'm going to go back. Again, a lot of this is just experimenting big time. I don't know if I like color dodge for this. Yeah, overlay is way better. Okay, so that's better. So now what we'll do is can make this a little bit brighter. So now if we go back to animate, I had the wrong blend mode. It's way better looking. Look how cool that is. Oh yeah. Okay, so now at this point, we could do other interesting things that deal with maybe creating like a hover effect that will modify or make something change about this in some way, shape, or form. So I'll show you how to do that, and that deals with creating the state machine logic, essentially. So to do that, what we'll do is we're going to switch to animate here, and you'll see we have our animation. idle, and then we have the state machine itself. So we need to create a second idle animation, or not idle animation. We have to right click and duplicate it. And then now we have idle 2. We could change this. We'll call this hover. There we go. And then when we want to make adjustments to this based on like a hover, for instance, then we can start making adjustments here. So for instance, the blob. What we can do is we can move that up on hover a little bit. So we'll take our y-axis and simply move it up maybe to around here. And let's say for now that that's the only change we want to make, which is fine. Now, if we go back to idle, we can see the two different states. Now, how do we make them transition? Well, we have to do a little bit of work here. And it seems kind of, if you've never done it before, it's going to seem a little bit strange. But just bear with me. So what we want to do is create an input, which is going to be a Boolean value, true or false, right here. We're going to double click and change it to button hover underscore hover. By default, this is set at false. And then we add two different listeners. One's going to be button enter. All right. And we want to select a target. So over here, when you select a listener, you'll see this section over here change. And we need to specify a target to specify what element should be triggering this other animation called hover when the mouse enters over it. So we want it to do it so that it basically enters this rectangle or the card. I should rename that to card, but whatever. So the rectangle is what we want to select. So when we select this, we choose rectangle. All right, so now if we click it again, button enter, we'll see it says rectangle right here. Now pointer enter says select input. We're going to choose button hover, and we're going to set that to true. Very simple. Then we're going to take this, we're going to duplicate it, button enter 2, now changes to button exit, and as such, we change this here to false. Okay, nothing's going to change yet because we haven't worked in our logic. So by default, it is already, our state machine is pointed at the right timeline called idle, right? That's our first one. But we want to drag our hover state over here. Then we're going to drag a transition or connection right from from idle rather to hover, and one that goes back from hover to idle as well. And in order to get this to work, we have to click on this little arrow in the middle, which reveals all of this information right here. So the first thing is the duration. And if you leave this at 0 duration, it will automatically switch immediately to that state, and you'll see a big jump quickly. Now, if you increase this, then it will create a tween animation from any of the properties that are compared between the two timelines, if that makes sense. So I'm going to set this at 200 milliseconds. All right, and then additionally, we have to come down to conditions. Click plus, choose button hover, and we'll just say true. So let's hit play. Ah, look at that. Now when we hover out, it's not working because we haven't created the other connection. So to do that, hit spacebar, by the way, to stop it. We'll come back over here, drag another connection. So this one going this way, we have to repeat that same information. So 200 milliseconds, create a condition, change this to button hover, false. See, this is how we're programmatically changing this property right here, button hover. And I think that'll work. So let's hit spacebar, hover over it, and hover back off. Oopsie, didn't work. Ah, yes, I forgot. So because in our hover animation, we specified a keyframe that exists on the blob on the y-axis, but if we go back to idle and we select the blob over here, you'll see there is no keyframe on the y-axis. So basically it gets overridden when we go to hover, and then it stays there because we didn't also define the y-axis keyframe right there. So all we have to do is click that, and let's undo that. Make sure your playhead's at the beginning. There we go. Now we can click that. And then one final thing that I forgot to change is when we have button exit selected, it's not a button enter, it is pointer exit. There we go. So now let's hit the space bar, hover over it, hover off, and there we go. Now we can make this animation even more interesting by also adjusting the values over here and also the scale, which we'll do that real quick. But we can also make it more interesting by adjusting the interpolation between our two states. So if we click on the one right here going towards it, and we scroll down over here, we can choose cubic. Sorry, it's showing up off the screen, unfortunately. There we go. And we can adjust it even more so, these two values. And we could do the same thing on this one. Okay, so watch what ends up happening here. It's going to make it a little bit more snappy. We'll have to adjust the duration. So if I hover over, it's a lot more snappy. So what we could do is adjust this maybe to 600 milliseconds, as well as the other one. Sweet. All right, so another thing we can do real quick is we'll go back to our hover state, and we'll take our blob, and I'm going to make it a little bit larger in terms of the scale X. So we left click like this. We can also do the scale Y a bit. All right, which means we need to go back to idle and do the same thing for the default state, so X and Y. There we go. Now if we go back to state machine, see how much larger it makes it. All righty. Kind of crazy, but it'll look more interesting when we also adjust the other values here. So if we go back to hover, we could take our bottom blur and we'll just move it up slightly. And we also can increase the scale a bit if you wanted to, like that. And then we'll also take this blur, move that up as well. And then we'll go back to idle and take those two elements. We're going to put a keyframe here, here, and here, as well as bottom blur as well. Okay. So now let's go back to state machine. So now it kind of moves them all up. All right, very cool. So what this means is if you wanted to start adding more to this, for instance, let's take a type tool and we'll left click here and we'll just say Deep Sea Adventures or something. And then we'll change the text style over here, not the style, but the font, maybe to Poppins, make it bold. Good old Poppins. There we go. Increase the font size. I'll just show you real quickly how you can start adding to this. Adjust the line height a little bit. Oops, wrong one. There we go. Deep Sea Adventures. So if it, like, let's say it's starting off like right here. Maybe we could center it. There we go. And we go back to animate. If we choose our idle state, it's exactly where it needs to be, but we also need to set a keyframe on the Y axis right here. You go back to the hover state, and we can push this up slightly right there. So now watch, we go to state machine and we hover over. Ooh, look at that, see? That's how you could start creating animations between these different areas. So let me show you my little demo where I took this further, and just to show you how much more you can add to it. So let me get out my reference document here. So this is the same concept here of what we had before. Now if I hit the space bar and I hover over it, yeah, it's a little silly. Now this book now button kind of sucks. I would, if I really wanted to take it further, I could make a much better button, make that one interactive, but then we start getting a little bit more in depth. But as a first kind of tutorial and introduction to utilizing Rive for the web. I think that's pretty sufficient. And at this point, you can just hit export or share or publish. And this will allow you to literally use this element here, this whole thing on a web page, this whole artboard. Now, if you were really going to use this on a web page, I wouldn't make the artboard this big. It's unnecessary for this size. We can kind of push it in, and then you can implement this as a canvas element, HTML element, as an embed on your web page. And there's so much other really cool stuff you can do that I'm excited to tackle here in the future. So let me know what you think. If you enjoyed this, I will see you all very soon, and goodbye.